Everybody got their PowerPoint pulled up if they need it. If you need another minute, pull up your PowerPoint, get ready, get locked in, get excited for the Bill of Rights, as I know you all are. Who's excited? That's what I'm talking about. Chunky or smooth peanut butter? How about that? Smooth? Depends.
Choose one. Like, I don't want to fight really nice creamy peanut butter and jelly. I don't want to put like crunchy peanut butter on my toast.
You sound like you hate crunchy peanut butter. So that's what I'm picking up. Okay. Okay. Online. Crunchy or smooth peanut butter? Go. No opinions?
Man, give me a crunchy peanut butter.
Crunchy
Smooth.
peanut butter? Any smooth people out here?
Definitely smooth.
More smooth? Okay. All right.
Definitely.
Okay. Crunchy peanut butter with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich ever? Or is that weird?
No, that's delicious.
That's good?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you don't do that. You don't
All
do
right.
that. You don't do that.
That's right. I was looking specifically, Trey, I was looking specifically for you to tell me that I could do that. And now I'm going to do it today when I go home. All right. Let's talk about the Bill of Rights. All right. Individual rights and the limits of government power, all of our favorite things. So with the Bill of Rights starting, obviously this is the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. We've kind of talked about some of these already. But we're going to get this is like our deep dive, right? This is our in-depth thing. We've glossed over some of these things. You have a decent understanding of some of these things, but other, amendments, things like the First Amendment. Honestly, I'll say that most of our discussion today is going to be on the First Amendment, which gives you an example of how long this is probably going to take us to get through, is because we're going to be talking probably for about an hour or so on the First Amendment, just going straight into it. Amendments we've talked about before. Obviously, it's a change or addition to the Constitution. They're not really easy to come about. We spent a lot more time on them last class, so I'm not going to focus on them too much today and what the process is. The Bill of Rights, looking at this specifically, it wasn't originally part of the Constitution, which is a little surprising to a lot of people. But that being said, it's not like it took 50, 60 years to come about. It was, Constitution, we're doing all this stuff, 1776. Bill of Rights comes about in about 1791, December 15th. The Bill of Rights is a Sagittarius, so congratulations to the Bill of Rights. That's its astrology sign. Me as well, so something there in common with the Bill of Rights. This is written to gain support of those who feared a powerful central government, obviously. Why do you think that people would fear that? What's the reason? Exactly. It's almost like they were running away from a powerful central government. It's like they were having that issue with the monarchy and King George III, just absolutely hosing them all the time, telling them, do this, do that, right? They don't want that, right? They want something else. They want power to the people. This gives you the liberty in our liberty versus security debate. I know a lot of you guys, I started grading your V for Vendetta papers. Some of you got your grades back, some of you haven't. I know that liberty versus security was kind of a big idea in that film. And it's something that you guys have talked about a lot. So this is giving you the liberty section of things, like your freedom. This is talking about your individual freedoms and the things that work for you. It provides protection for you from the government. It's a big thing. The Bill of Rights is yours. It's good for you, right? You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who's like, man, I hate the Bill of Rights, right? There's not a lot of people out there that say that. So for the most part, it's seen as pretty much a positive thing all around. Though there are obviously some issues, points of contention, especially with like the First Amendment, points of contention with the Second Amendment. Other than that, though, like there's other, like Amendment 5, not a lot of people have a problem with that. Amendment 9 and 10, there's occasionally issues there, but the biggest two amendments that we'll focus on are 1 and 2, right? Those are the ones that pretty much everybody knows, everybody has a good understanding of. So like I said today, First Amendment, just to notice, the guys who wrote this, they absolutely love run-on sentences. They love them. They'll never get away from run-on sentences. There's so many run-on sentences in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. If you showed this to your English teacher, they would probably just die, right? They would be like, are you kidding me? Okay. And these are educated guys, but, obviously grammar and things have changed throughout time. So, yeah. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Does anybody remember what we call that? Any idea? Yes, the Establishment Clause, and we'll deep dive into that a little bit more. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. What do we call that? It's in the phrase. We got the Establishment Clause, and we have the what clause?
Free exercise clause.
That's right, free exercise clause. Shout out to you. Or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peacefully assemble, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Right? So we have freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to protest, and then the right to basically complain about your government, or the right to trash talk Joe Biden on Twitter if you want to, or, you know, rest in peace to Donald Trump's Twitter account, but if you wanted to, previously, you could have done it, all right? Now, you're going to have to tag, like, Melania or something if you want to do that. Up to you. First Amendment, going through it, okay? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Sounds pretty simple, right? This is the Establishment Clause. But the thing about it is that it gets a little complicated, all right? And so the government can't establish official state religions. They can't require citizens to follow a certain religion. There's no mention of God in the Constitution, though a lot of these guys did believe in God. A lot of them were like Christian or Catholic or what have you. But this is where it gets, you know, complicated, is what counts as establishing a religion. So obviously we can't do it, but like, where do we draw the line on a lot of different things? Okay, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about a lot today. So, moving forward, you know, a lot of people see this and they're like, okay, in God we trust. Who's seen that? Pretty sure it's on my license plate too, right? It's everywhere. This phrase, in God we trust. It's on the coins. It's on the dollar, right? It wasn't always a thing. It wasn't always around, but people might look at that and say, this is the national currency. It says in God we trust. Isn't that establishing a religion, right? And some people would argue that and would maybe make a fuss about that, and people have made a fuss about that. It's added in 1866 after lobbying by religious groups. There's a lot of religious sentiment after, you know, or during the Civil War. This guy, his first name is Salmon. Do with that what you will. Salmon P. Chase. Almost sounds like, what is it, like P. Sherman 42 something Wallaby Lane. That's from Finding Nemo? What is it? Is that what his name is? P. Sherman?
42
P. Sherman, Salmon P. Chase. You know, maybe they're distant relatives. Who knows? He received an abundant amount of appeals, and people are, you know, all these religious people are coming over and saying, like, I think that we should set up the recognition of, like, God, right? Maybe we should get back to this idea of religion, this idea of God. Teddy Roosevelt comes in, he tries to have it removed, but Congress is like, no, Teddy, I think we're going to keep it, all right? Teddy, people like it. It looks nice. We're not going to remove that. The Supreme Court kind of declines to hear cases on it, and I think that that's probably because of how controversial it would be. This is something that's pretty old at this point. It's well set in. There's probably not really a win in that situation for the Supreme Court. It's probably a lose-lose either way. The Supreme Court's probably going to look at that and say, like, hey, if we get rid of In God We Trust, people are going to be mad at us. If we keep In God We Trust, somebody's still going to be mad at us, right? So what do we do? What's the point, right? And I think that that kind of comes back because it's kind of a lose-lose situation. I think there would be outrage regardless. So even if they think they're doing the right thing, I think that they would have a lot more backlash for that than anything. Also, the big thing. Why do you think that this is allowed? Any idea? What's one of the arguments for it? In God we trust. What do you think the argument against it is? Why can't you do that? What in the First Amendment? What clause? The Establishment Clause, right? Which says that you can't do what? Establish a religion. Now, on the flip side, if you're somebody who's like, keep it. What is your argument here? Any idea? Is this establishing a religion? No, right? Why not? Exactly. It's very vague. In God we trust. It doesn't say in Jesus we trust, right? It doesn't say in Allah we trust. It doesn't say, you know, in Vishnu we trust or anything like that. There's nothing going on there. You're not really establishing a religion, and that's the argument that a lot of people have towards this. So it doesn't specify God; it just says God, right? So technically, it could apply to every religion. Okay, that is something to keep in mind, and that's a lot of this stuff is interpreted. Same thing here, same idea here. Okay, one nation under God. Everybody's done the Pledge of Allegiance. Even if you don't do it now, you've probably done it at some point in your life. I mean, I did for the longest time. Now I don't really say it, but I get up here and I stand there and I stand in front of the flag. I think that's just because I'm quiet in the mornings. That's it. Other than that, but I didn't even think about that. I haven't heard it either. That's weird. Well, it still happens at middle schools and stuff like that. It still happened at Jackson Creek when I was there. I didn't even think about that. But you see a difference, obviously, nowadays in the way the pledge is handled as opposed to what it would have been in the past. So, one nation under God, this is another thing. Just like the In God We Trust, it's not originally part of the pledge, all right? It's added in 1954 in response to this fear of godless communism, right? All these godless commies in our country. Make them say the pledge, right? Make them say In God We Trust. That'll root them out because they won't say it, right? If they're godless commies, it's kind of the idea.
Communism is a godless religion that actively fight for godless. It's godless government that fights against the establishment of religion. So if we establish religion slightly more firmly, we are having a second barrier.
Yeah, and that's definitely an argument too with it for sure. You have this idea of at the very least, make them recognize it, right? And so, again, is God generic? Or is it Christian? I think that you can make arguments, in either direction on that. But that's coming from somebody who grew up Catholic, right? I grew up Catholic, so when I think of God, I obviously think, more towards my family's religion and my own personal upbringing. But maybe, other religions, when they think of the word God, they think of their own God and their own religion, right? So there's an argument either way or therefore, I think. Is it generic? And I think that there's definitely a very solid argument that the phrase, just God in general would be seen as a very generic thing that would apply across many different religions, for sure. But that being said, it doesn't mean that everybody feels that way. So there's been multiple lawsuits saying that it's unconstitutional, right? Violating what amendment then? First, in violating what clause? Establishment, right? That's kind of what we're looking at here. Students forced to say it either way, right? Maybe, right? Or they set themselves apart from those who do. So yeah, nowadays, if you don't even want to stand up for the pledge, you don't have to. You can sit down. When I was younger, it seemed to be a bigger thing. But nowadays, I think we're getting better about that. You're not forced to say it, but if you don't, maybe you look like an outsider or something like that, right? California court said it's unconstitutional. Supreme Court has not recently ruled. It kind of gets back to the idea of is it a lose-lose situation for us to attack this, to go after it? Yeah, probably. So I don't think they're really going to come up with it not too hastily, at least. This is an interesting image. Has anybody ever seen this?
No, but I've heard about how that was.
Yeah. This always makes me laugh because people look at this and they're like, oh, okay, what's going on here, right? What does it look like they're doing? Yeah, but what does it look like they're doing? Like what? Gesture? Yeah. Yeah, it looks like they're hailing Hitler for the most part. Are they hailing Hitler? No, they're saluting the flag, right? This is actually kind of this whole story kind of makes me laugh the way that things are approached in this. But the original salute to the U.S. flag was the origin of the National Socialist German Workers' Party salute. They kind of took that and modified it to their own needs, obviously. But it used to be something that we would see in schools a lot. It was known as the Bellamy Salute, named after Francis J. Bellamy. Everybody back then was named Francis. I don't know why. Everybody's named Francis. But Mr. Bellamy wrote the original Pledge of Allegiance. Things changed over time. Obviously, like you said, In God We Trust wasn't always in there. But Francis is coming out. He's dropping the bars, right? He's got this hot 16-verse Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody's super excited about it. And he's like, yo, you know what else would work? What if we added like a nice salute, right? So everybody's like, let's salute the flag. And this was pretty much fine, right? Everybody's okay with it. Everybody's out here saluting the flag. They're loving it. It's fine. And then all of a sudden, they start to look at the newspapers, and they're like, man, this guy Hitler, he seems to be like using the same kind of salute. And then they kind of start looking at each other, and they're like, maybe we shouldn't salute the flag anymore, right? And that's basically what happens. Everything's fine all the way up until World War II, until they start seeing that like the Nazis and the Italian Fascist Party is like utilizing the salute for different reasons, and they're like, maybe we back off on the saluting and we just do like the hand over the heart thing. They're like, maybe that's cooler. It looks better anyway, whatever. So they drop the salute. But this is just, kind of an example of some of that stuff and the expression that you're seeing. People saw this, they're like, all right, let's not salute anymore, and you kind of move on from it. But this used to be a thing, and it was, whether or not it was required, in schools or not, it was probably, a big social norm of that time. Yeah.
Were you going to glance over the socialist
Yeah. No, that's also something that I was going to touch on. But yeah, so it's definitely a major point of that too, promoting that idea. But that's kind of just like the main thing that you're seeing in the image. It's honestly more of this is about the image than the background of it than anything. But yeah, that's for sure part of it.
Thank God they didn't see the
Yeah, of course not, right? Here's another example. A bunch of people, again, going out and looking like they're basically Hitler saluting the flag. But again, at this time, this was like pre-World War II. We're not really seeing that. You also see that the Nazis take the swastika and morph it to their own kind of needs and ideas. So you do see changes and stuff like that. Obviously, nobody wants to be associated with Hitler or the Nazis, right? Especially during this time, if you're a American citizen. Not a shot, right? So do everything that you can to kind of stick away from that. Looking at the First Amendment again, we have in 1993, an Alabama judge. He places this statue of the Ten Commandments on the courthouse lawn. Why is that an issue? Yeah, but why? What's the big issue here? It's a specific set of religions, right? The Ten Commandments goes with like Christianity, right? Yeah, as well. And so maybe you're not even establishing one, but you're establishing multiple, right? But you're excluding other religions as well. And then what else? What's the other takeaway? Why is it also an issue? It's on the lawn of the courthouse, right? Instead of my podium up here, this is a public school. Can I have my statue of the Ten Commandments up here that I throw my hands on every day? And I'm like, hey, it would be kind of sick. But, can I do that? Yeah.
So if he put it on his personal lawn, that'd be okay.
If it was on his personal lawn, that's where it gets into kind of like those muddy water territories, right? Because he's a government official now. Now, I am also technically basically a government official. Can I go home and exercise my religion how I want? Yeah, right? So I think that, in that vein, it's something I have to look into more, but I would say probably 9 times out of 10, yeah, he'd probably be fine with that. A lot of this stuff does also depend on the social context in the areas that you're in. And we'll see that with some of these things on there. If you're in a rural area where everybody's around you is Christian and you do that, there's no way that anybody's going to give you any flack. It's probably not going to happen, right? Now in Bloomington especially, right? Bloomington's pretty progressive in a lot of areas, and you have a good mix of people out here. If this happens in Bloomington, do you think there's going to be outrage? Probably. Somebody will probably say something about it, right? Now in the case of like, I don't know, a very, very rural area. Now, obviously, this is Alabama, but if you're doing this in somewhere that's like a super small town, there's not going to be like a lot of people around, and maybe everybody's like on the same page with what religion they're thinking of, unless an outsider comes in or somebody who really cares about. Yeah, right. Somewhere over there, you might have an easier shot of getting away with something like that. That doesn't mean that these things don't happen, but sometimes, obviously they make news. Or they get, somebody gets caught doing it, and then you can easily point to that, find outrage, and then somebody will be like, well, this is literally unconstitutional, and that gives you grounds to remove something like this. The judge looks at this, and he's like, I refuse. And then he is removed from office, right? Because this obviously gains enough traction that people are like, hey, this is an issue. Some people argue that's part of legal and cultural tradition. I think that most people can look at this and say, that's establishing a religion on a government property. That is the biggest issue here. Not only does it establish a certain religion, but it establishes it on court property, which is really what it comes down to: the location and the specificity of the religion. Another example, what do we have here? What's it look like? The nativity scene. Where does it look like it's at? Some sort of governmental building, right? Courthouse, something, whatever it is, it's government property for sure. Okay? It seems to be all government buildings look the same. I don't know why. Maybe they have just an architect that designs all of them, just one guy. Either way, again, could you get away with this in some towns? Yeah, right? Somebody might not make a fuss in every single town. But when somebody does make a fuss, do they have a right to? Yeah, they do. Under the Establishment Clause, they have a right to look at this and say, that is unconstitutional behavior. So do some places get away with this? Certainly. I'm sure of it. There's probably somebody that's going to do it this year. Who knows? Maybe they've done it every year. And the social norms of the area say, how we let that go, right? You see that oftentimes. Social norms do play a role. Whether or not people want to enforce things is definitely, part of it. Yeah. But you take a look at this and you say, all right, that's establishing, obviously, a certain religion with the nativity scene. It's not some sort of ambiguous religious thing in general, right? It's establishing a certain religion, and it is, again, on government property. So that is the issue that we're having there. Now it says, and this one's kind of mean, right? And it doesn't respect religions, really. But it says, at the season of the winter solstice, may reason prevail. There are no gods, no devils, no angels, no heaven or hell. There is only our natural world. Religion is but a myth and superstition that hardens hearts and enslaves minds. Is this allowed? I see some heads shaking no.
It's not the establishment of a religion, but it's the establishment of an anti-religion. That's not the establishment of a religion.
Is an anti-religion a religion, though?
I mean, is anarchy a form of government?
It has a point. Right? Yeah. But again, do you see how confusing that gets? Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Right? We can make those points obviously in our class, but if you take that to the Supreme Court, do you see how muddy the waters get? And that's a fantastic point right there. Is that a form of government? Right? And you can make these arguments all day. You can look at this and say, yeah, you're not establishing a religion, right? In fact, you're establishing almost the opposite of it. You're establishing almost a form of atheism, right?
I feel like that one's specific. Like when you put up the nativity scene, you're not going out there and be like, hey, all you atheists, you're stupid. When you're putting this up, it's like, I'm a Catholic. I'm just not a Catholic. Yeah. I love my religion. I try to be pretty open.
Yeah.
Pardon my French, that's just a shitty thing to say.
Of course. Yeah. It's not a nice way to go about things, right? But did people get away with doing this? Yeah, they did. And part of the reason is part of looking at that is just to look and see that a lot of this stuff is interpretation, right? It's interpretation, and whether or not you agree with the interpretation all the time, obviously you're going to fall on one side or the other. We'll get into some more controversial things. Obviously, we're going to look at like the KKK, right? And we'll talk about them. Do I like the KKK? Hell no, right? If I could see the KKK disappear from existence, that would be great. Do they still exist? Yes. Are they allowed to exist? Yeah, unfortunately, but it's part of the stuff that we're going to be learning today. So yeah, excellent point. But also looking at this and just realizing how muddy the waters are on some of this stuff and seeing how difficult it can be and the slippery slopes that you also fall down with a lot of the decisions that you might make with this. Also gives you a good example and a good understanding as to why sometimes the Supreme Court looks at these things and they're like, I'm going to just not touch this, right? I'm not going to touch this because, as you know, Supreme Court, they're the highest court. When they make a decision on something, it kind of affects a lot of stuff, right? So sometimes they have to deliberate and they have to look at different cases and say, I'm going to tackle this or I'm not going to tackle this. Part of the reason why they probably haven't, re-looked at a lot of the things with Roe v. Wade. Will they get around to it? Who knows? When will they? Who knows if they will, whatever, right? There's a reason why they don't always immediately jump on something for sure. So just keeping that in mind. Okay. So good discussion on that. I like the way we're going with this. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, right? This is the what clause? Free exercise clause, right there in the name. Okay, the free exercise clause. Americans are free to practice any religion they believe in. No discrimination or persecution based on religion, right? So we're going to get into some more things here. All right. So again, free exercise. It's in the name. You're allowed to freely exercise something. You can be a follower of Islam. You can follow the Church of Satan if you want. You could, what is that? There's like a Church of Marijuana or something. Feel free,
I
right?
think it was actually, it's not, I think that, like,
They went against it on that one. I haven't looked up the Church of Marijuana
it
lately,
was,
so
I know it was founded in, I think after a little bit, they were like, we can't have this.
the big thing is and something that we'll talk on the next slide is obviously the tax exempt situation, right? So yeah, you're allowed to practice whatever religion you want. I mean, I'm pretty sure as long as you're not sacrificing anybody, you could probably be a pagan if you want to be a paganist and do witchcraft or whatever, right? Not always the case with the Salem witch trials and what have you, but things have changed over time, and we're seeing some differences here. Progressiveness, right? So what is a religion? What is a religion? What do we use to define religion? Who's heard of Scientology? Anybody? Funny story. My dad accidentally accepted, he didn't know what Scientology was when he was younger. Nobody had really a huge idea, especially when it was first starting. They paid for him to go on a trip to California, and he went out there and did a bunch of Scientology stuff, and he was like, okay, it was a free trip. He was like, I don't think this is really for me. And they were like, no, you should stay. And he's like, what? They're like, we'll pay for you to stay a couple more weeks. He was like, I think I'm going to leave. He left, was like, I'm out of this. It's kind of weird. Didn't really enjoy that situation. To this day, my dad is like 60 years old. They still call him. To this day. I don't think they'll ever stop calling. It's probably going to keep going, right? Yes, there's so many interesting documentaries on it. And if you know anything about Scientology, then that'll make this conversation even better. Islam, Scientology, Wicca, which is kind of that idea of like witchcraft, paganism, right? Should tax exempt status be given to all of these? What do you think? Do all of these fit? Are all of these religions?
Islam is a well-established religion.
Yeah.
It has places where they practice prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Taxes, that doesn't mean everybody practices taxes. It's good areas are taxes.
Yep.
So Islam, I think they already have that.
Mm-hmm.
Scientology.
What do we think about Scientology? That's my main focus here. What do we think about Scientology?
It's a cult.
Is it a religion?
More or less, Mormonism is a cult. So I can't say that I don't think they should be taxes, but I can't say that I do.
Anybody else? Anybody online? What do we think about Scientology? Does this fit? Does this fit with what we're talking about? Does anybody know the background of Scientology? The kind of idea? So I'm going to say, sorry, go ahead.
Never mind. I just said Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise, right? Tom Cruise, by the way, his tooth is in the center of his face. Nobody can stop me from believing that. Has anybody ever seen that picture? When you get a chance, look up Tom Cruise, tooth in center of face. He's got a weird tooth. Something's going on there. Yeah, there's something going on. Tom Cruise got the most, he put the thing on Microsoft Word where you center your documents, but he did it with his tooth, okay? Now, I'm going to say something, and this is not meant to be aggravating to anybody, but some people might get aggravated by it. And here's what I'm going to say. Some people argue that Scientology is pretty crazy, right? Some people argue that the idea of souls, exploding out of a volcano and washing over the entire world and inhabiting bodies and things of that nature, some people say that's a little wild. How do we believe that? Many people scoff at that idea, and they say that's not a real religion. I have my own opinions on Scientology. Please see me at the educational aspect of this. However, with respect to Christianity, right, sometimes, people look at the idea of immaculate conception, and they say, how does that happen? right? They say, what's this deal with immaculate conception? Somebody didn't ever, procreate, but they have a child, and where did that come from? So do you see, again, with respect to all religions, I don't care either way, whatever you practice. I said myself, I have my roots in Catholicism. Do you see where the waters are muddy on this one as well? Anybody? You see that? As long as you understand where the waters are muddy and you understand why this is such a weird thing to argue, oftentimes, especially in like the Supreme Court, why it's such a big deal and why you see oftentimes places like Scientology are tax exempt. I have my own views on religious purposes and tax exempt statuses. Shout out to Joel Osteen and whatever private jet he's on, right? I have my own views on a lot of this stuff, right? I'm not going to put them on you. You think what you want. I don't care. It doesn't bother me either way. But think about it in the context of the First Amendment, right? And that is where we're really trying to attack some of this stuff. The First Amendment and how it applies to different religions. Do we favor a religion like Christianity or Islam because they're well established over something else? Like, who gets to decide really what a religion is? And who gets to decide who's good and who's, not in that category? So that's just something, keep your minds open on it, think about it, and keep it in mind when we talk about the First Amendment. Right, Jim Jones, right? Does anybody know about Jim Jones? Yeah, Jim Jones literally leading a cult, don't drink the Kool-Aid, all of that stuff. Yeah, should Jim Jones have been tax exempt?
I did a national survey project on Jim Jones.
Uh-huh.
Joke. Like, they were making us do this project and whatever they started outs for.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about, yeah.
We decided, me and like Jeff, we were like, well, the thing is, taking stances is great, but we're going to decide on somebody who could stand in the wrong way.
Yeah.
And they agreed that Hitler probably wasn't the best idea.
Yeah, probably not. But you could probably make an argument for Jim Jones if you want without a lot of backlash.
We did Jim Jones,
Mm-hmm.
and we were the only group at Bachelor that got accepted to go to state.
I love that.
None of us flinched. We all decided that was stupid.
Yeah.
But that's the best.
I love that. I love that, and that gets you perfectly at the idea of like, how do we determine these things and how weird a lot of this stuff can be. Absolutely. Next question. Could an atheist be president? Is there anything stopping an atheist from being president? No. Some people argue that Thomas Jefferson was an atheist. Many people do, actually. There's documents all over the place of like, our good friend TJ, they're like, I think that he doesn't really respect religion or whatever. So he did, he faced a lot of backlash for that. I am of the attitude that I don't think Thomas Jefferson was really an atheist. I just think that he wasn't he's got a weird relationship with religion, but I do believe that he was not an atheist. I think he's more like a deist. Somebody who believes in God, but somebody that doesn't really believe that God is like, controlling too much. Hands off. Laissez-faire for God, right? It's borderline, right? But not necessarily. It's a weird, yeah. Yeah. So it's yes. Yes, he's got an interesting, kind of relationship with religion, and that's kind of the way I would phrase it. But, is there anything that says that you have to swear on the Bible? No, I've seen our own politicians make this stupid mistake. I saw a guy on Twitter where he's like, well, she swore on something else. She didn't swear on the Bible. Do you have to swear on the Bible? No. Not everybody's sworn on the Bible, right? Some people, when they swear into office, they come through and they swear on their, if they're Islamic, maybe they swear on the Quran. Or sometimes people swear on like a dictionary for like law or some sort of law book, things like that. Realistically, you can swear on pretty much anything, okay? So, to say that an atheist couldn't be president is pretty false. Now, is it likely that any of our presidential candidates are going to run on the platform of being an atheist? Why not? Does anybody have any idea? Yeah.
One party, I will not name, has a very traditionalist view on what they want to office. So a lot of them would vote, or it's going to be more likely to vote if you come out as Christian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other party would probably vote for atheist.
Maybe.
I'm not gonna say they wouldn't.
Yeah.
They believe, accepting everybody as progressive. Yeah. Some people use atheism as progressive.
Mhm.
Some people view atheism as not progressive.
Yeah, I think that's fair in some aspects. I think that, but at the same time, I mean, not everybody sees President Joe Biden as being the most, on the farthest of the liberal sides by any means. But with that in mind, he is devoutly, very out there with his religion. It was a big running platform for him as well, and he's with the Democratic Party, right? And you've got many Democratic candidates who would be in the same vein. One of the reasons I think that they know is that there's such a heavy hold of religion in this country that even though we don't have an established religion, the amount of, the fact of the matter is that many of the people in this country would take religion to be a positive characteristic, I think, for a politician. And I think that some people would take the absence of religion as a way to, look at, maybe target, maybe criticize a politician, saying things along the lines of like, and this is one of the arguments that people said against our good friend TJ, Thomas Jefferson, is that if you don't believe in, God, or you don't believe in a heaven or hell, then what is stopping you from, taking advantage of people? So it kind of gets at the idea, if you're looking at godless communism, right? Communism is assuming that people are altruistic, that people are good, right? So it kind of ties back to that a little bit, I think. So this is kind of another one of those things that you could talk about for forever, right? So, moving on. Oh my gosh. All right, moving on. First Amendment, freedom of speech and press. This one is always entertaining to go through, right? It's always entertaining to go through. So, abridging the freedom of speech or the press, meant to allow, criticism of the government as well as investigation into corruption. I agree with that for sure. You're allowed to say some stuff about your government that you can't necessarily do in other countries. Arguably the most important right in democracy. How else do we hold free elections? How else do we recognize abuses of power? Wherever you stand on the whole voting, fraud fiasco, and I have again my own opinions on it that I won't delve into. But wherever you stand on that entire situation, whether you believe it was present or not present, you have a right to express those opinions. Your politicians even have a right to do it, whether or not it's responsible or what or not responsible. So that is part of free speech, right? That is part of, recognizing potential abuses of power. The issue comes here, though, in how do we define speech? Does it have to be verbal? Can you exercise speech without saying anything at all? Can your actions be speech, right? This is where it gets confusing, because these are not things that are expressly written in the Constitution, like flat out for you. You don't have every single rule for freedom of speech. So what does that mean? What does that mean you have to do with it? You have to interpret it, right? You have to interpret it. So that is where kind of sometimes the Supreme Court comes into the picture with like judicial review. Taking a look at this. Obama, right? Liberal fascism, we can believe it. It's a criticism, okay? It might look like it's supposed to be like a fun thing, but it's a criticism of President Obama. There's no such thing as political crime in America, right? I have done it. I have committed political crimes, so they don't exist here. I have said things to politicians on the internet, and I have not been arrested. Go ahead, do it sometime. It's therapeutic, right? Pick your least favorite politician and say something to them mean, whatever you want to do, as long as you're not threatening violence on them and you're not using fighting words, as we'll talk about, you're not going to get thrown in jail, right? You won't be charged with anything. That is one of the beauties of our country. You wake him up. Just give him a little tap. Or you can do that. That's fine. Good morning. So citizens in other countries are jailed for criticizing leaders. You see that often. Did you hurt your hand? Is it okay? You gonna make it? Okay. I guess if you need a cast or something, I'm not gonna pay for it, but I'll be here for you. I'll hold your cast hand. you know. Citizens in other countries jailed for criticizing leaders. Obviously, you see that. I've lived with a couple of people at this point this year from China. So, you know, I've asked them because it's interesting to talk to somebody who's from China while they're in the United States about their government and what they think of it. And it felt even, you know, as I talk to some of, you know, I live with a guy right now. And sometimes when I ask him about it, he still seems kind of guarded about some of the things that he says. Rightfully so, right? Rightfully so. Same thing that you'll see what the guy, Navalny, right? He's a Russian opposition, right? You see some things where political opponents are being jailed in other countries. You don't really see that in the United States. You don't have these political crimes. You don't know anything about that situation, look it up. I know that Joe Biden just put sanctions on Russia for the handling of that situation because I'm pretty sure he's jailed for 2 years or something like that. Plus, he was literally poisoned and recovered. Pretty cool. I don't know. You can put that on your resume. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
My favorite thing she's ever told me is, Mike, don't do socialism.
Mm-hmm.
People in your schools, people you know, they will say socialism is good. Mike, do not do socialism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, imagine trying to criticize Pol Pot in Cambodia during his reign, right? Not going to happen. Imagine saying anything relatively intelligent around Pol Pot. Probably don't want to do that either, right? He had a huge issue with stuff like that. So, yes, you can criticize your politicians. You can do things like that. It's one of the great things about America, you know? Say what you want. As long as you're not using fighting words, as long as you're not inciting violence, then you're probably good to go with it. And even more so with politicians, what do we remember about things like libel and slander? What about them? In regards to politicians, high-ranking figures, is it easier or harder for them to pursue you for libel or slander? Do we see this happening a lot? Harder, right? It's more difficult. You have to have like actual malice being shown, right? So it's harder, you know, if you, I don't know, put out an op-ed or tabloid about Joe Biden or Donald Trump, if you put out an op-ed or tabloid about them saying some terrible stuff that you might not entirely be able to prove, but it maybe has some small basis in truth, they're probably not going to be able to sue you very well. We took a look at a couple of different examples last class, or when we were looking at, you know, the different definitions of a lot of these things. So maybe just something to keep in mind. Next, we love it, right? Flag burning. Who here has ever seen a flag actually being burned? In person. Yes. You as well? You know where? Demonstrations, protests, or?
All of the times I've seen them, they have been to give proper respect to the flag.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. How about in an insulting manner? Has anybody ever seen a flag being burned? No? Have you? No? I think it's always interesting to ask that question because I feel like this is one of those big things that's brought up, but I don't think it really happens as often as people think it does, right? That's not to say it doesn't happen. I'm certain it happens, right? I've seen it on the news. I've seen it on film and video and whatever. But, you know, the context of when it does happen, I think you're often seeing it in demonstrations, protests. People are usually angry in this context. But you do also, like you said, have other contexts where flags are being burned, maybe out of respect to the flag or, you know, if the flag touches the ground or whatever it might be, whatever the social norm is that you have around the flag. So, flag burning, you know, symbolic speech, or is it just insulting to those who have died to protect your freedoms? Which is it, you know, and that's the line that you toe. But I argue this to you. You know, maybe this angers you. Maybe it makes you mad. Maybe you don't like people burning flags. Maybe you'd like to see it stop. But again, not to be like the guy in every single college class who's like, let me play devil's advocate. That's annoying, right? But I'm going to tell you right now, what is more free than literally being able to burn the flag of the country that you live in? What is more free than that, right? So think of it how you will. Think of it how you might. Have your opinions on it. I encourage you to form your own opinions on it. I encourage you to think, you know, however you might want to. The Supreme Court has ruled that flag burning is legal. I'm not saying that I'm like walking outside and I'm like, well, let me burn a flag today. I'm not saying that. I've never burned a flag. I don't foresee myself ever burning a flag. But the fact is that if I wanted to, I could, right? And that's part of the First Amendment. That is part of the freedoms that you have, because it may be covered under symbolic speech. as long as I'm not lighting the flag on fire and then throwing it at somebody's house to burn their house down, I'm probably going to be okay with doing this, right? But again, think back to whether or not you actually see this happening very often at all anyway, and some of the political discourse that comes with that. We'll do a little bit more. I don't want to go for too long. Get a little bit more. Okay. So, this one's fun. Maybe we'll end with this. We'll end with this today. So, the KKK, right? Again, like I said, in no way am I a fan of the KKK. It feels like every single slide I'm pulling up. Hey, I don't like this, but like, let me tell you about it. All right. Let me go on record by saying that the KKK is absolutely vile. I hate the KKK. You know, I would say more explicit things, but I think I would get in trouble. All right. That being said, is it okay to be insulting? Is it okay to be racist? Yeah.
So long as you're not harming anybody.
And that's the terrible kind of the dichotomy that you have with your First Amendment freedoms. The purpose of this lecture and the purpose of everything that you should take away from today is that, yes, you know, we love our First Amendment rights. We love them. They're awesome. We use them every day. We probably take them for granted a lot of times. But in the same vein, there are potential downsides to our First Amendment rights. There are limitations, right? But how often we implement those limitations and how often, you know, you see them being used, it's a very slippery slope that falls. And I hate to use that as kind of a word, especially when talking about the KKK. But it's kind of this idea of, you know, yes, they're violent, disgusting. Yes, I would love to, infinity gauntlet the KKK, whatever. But the argument would be that, are we only allowed to have groups that we agree with? And then how do you define what is an okay group? What is a group that you agree with? Who agrees with it? Who doesn't agree with it? Do you take a vote? What do you do there, right? These are questions that we still haven't answered. Things that the Supreme Court still hasn't answered, right? So just keep that in mind. It leads us to the idea to the right to assembly, right? Somebody said, yeah, they're allowed to exist as long as they're not harming anybody. Has the KKK harmed people? Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, given the racism that is very prominent in this country, and especially back when the KKK was more prominent, did they always get away with it? Yeah, oftentimes they did, right? Nowadays, are they getting away with it? Maybe some places, right? But realistically, the idea here is that if this is out in the open, can the KKK have a march? Yes, they can. Am I allowed to go punch them? No. Are they allowed to go punch me? No. Right? And you have that on either side. Yes, again, don't get me wrong. You know, these are awful people. But, you know, maybe, you know, just to lighten the situation, we'll take a look at their website and see what they got. I know that they have merchandise for whatever reason. If we're going to burn something, maybe we buy that and we burn that. Who knows? Instead of, maybe we buy some sort of KKK merchandise and we burn that. So it gets to this idea of there is no way to stop bad ideas without opening the door to stopping good ideas as well, right? As soon as you stop a bad idea, you're going to have people probably on this side arguing that, well, if you're stopping us, then we want to stop this too. Well, if you're stopping the KKK, then we don't want, we don't want the NAACP, they might say, right? You have that kind of door, this Pandora's box that you would open in regards to the First Amendment. And that's, again, trust me, I understand it's frustrating. It's something I've struggled with even to this day to kind of understand and work through. But that is kind of the point of this lecture, is that all these different things are so muddy and so weirdly interpreted sometimes that it is important to keep that in mind. So let's take a look at their website. Let's see what they got. I would hope not. I would hope that they don't. Let me see. I'll stop. Let me show this to you online people as well. Let me see what I can present here.
What did they put on the KKK on the
I don't even know.
I have no idea.
So again, looking at this, like, they're allowed to have a website, right? They're allowed to have a website. As long as it's not actively inciting violence, right? Like the Taliban can't come on here and like say like, hey, this is the plans that we're doing. Like, these are all the things. As long as they don't have that type of stuff on their website, they can get away with it. right? Not to say that they're not meeting in secret and doing a bunch of terrible things, but the real thing with freedom of speech, this is outward stuff, right? This is actively seen in the public type of stuff. You have, I know, it's incredibly weird. You have, it's called the White Heritage Store. You have T-shirts, books, jewelry, pins, patches. You can donate with Bitcoin on the KKK website. Yeah. You got their phone number? Might need you to give me that later. We'll have to see what we can do. What kind of, hey, this is the funny thing too, is that Mr. Aiken went to go to the KKK website yesterday. I wonder what the school administrators are thinking of me right now, by the way. Mr. Doss on the KKK website at school. Who knows? But with this, Mr. Aiken went to go on their website the other day and somebody had taken it down. And I feel like that probably happens very often to the KKK website. So somebody had taken it down.
You and all your friends want to dress up as white wizards, and somebody just keeps taking on your website every day.
You have, it's crazy. You have, look at, what is your number one goal? We want to stop white genocide. And then immediately self-aware, this seems absurd to some people. Immediately self-aware. That's how you know it's probably not the best kind of ideas to roll with.
Properly genocided, maybe they have a point.
The media, for women, for law enforcement, tradition. Where is this? I want to go to their, let's see their store. Let's open this up. Currently not accepting credit cards at this time, only accepting checks and money orders. Oh, don't tread on me. Okay.
If I order a KKK shirt, would anybody buy it?
Probably not. I don't want to be seen. If you order a KKK shirt, I don't want to be seen around you. Southern Girls, Swedish cherry pie. What are these? Are these patches? I think these are patches or something.
I kind of like this.
This is what you put on your lifted truck, right?
I like the Southern Girls Swedish cherry pie, but I'm from Kentucky, so I'm required to like it.
Yeah. They could use a better website design. I'll tell you that.
I like it more than I like.
Who's got a better website design, Wings Extreme or the KKK? Has anybody ever been on the Wings Extreme website? It is awful. I'll show you guys that at the end of class. It's bad. It's good. They got good wings. This is, yeah, who's wearing this, right? Pretty terrible stuff on here. It's interesting to go through some of the things that they sell, the thin blue line.
Going to the beach with my brother.
A compact Confederate flag mirror, right? So the reason why we're looking at this stuff is, obviously, maybe we're poking fun here and there, but just the fact that they're able to have these websites, they're able to have a platform for expression. And the reason why they're able to is because of what? Freedom of speech, right? It has its pros, it has its cons, but obviously it's something that we all use every single day and we exercise with every single day. So just something to keep in mind. That is where we'll end today. Really good discussions by everybody. Really good, ability to take some of this stuff with maturity and taking a look at it and seeing it for what it is. So that is where we'll end today. And let me go ahead and end my recording.